Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, February 26th. So, once again, we are trying the multi-stream thing, so I just want to make sure that we are not running into any network problems. Last stream was fine, but then there is always going to be this possibility that one day the network may just be really poor, and so there might be some kind of network dropped frames. But nope, it looks like we are still going strong there, which I do question. Certainly, just what is my total upload speed really? Could I, if I'm going at about 6,600 kilobits per second right now to both Twitch and YouTube, could I squeeze out another, what would be 6,006 megabits per second to Facebook Live or any other service, frankly? I would assume the next one to go to would be Facebook Live. I don't think I'll ever really have an audience on Facebook Live anyways. The other thought, I guess, would be Twitter video. Certainly. I would definitely have to research both of those just to see if videos are kept for any amount of time, because it really doesn't make any sense to me to just be a live streamer and put up videos that then disappear after 30 days, after 7 days, after 24 hours even. I imagine there are some websites like that. Let's hop into actually playing now. So we have new gates in solo mode. I'm surprised, I guess, that they're still making solo mode stuff, but it is, I guess, nice that they're staying committed to it. Branded opening is going to be limited, and then Water Enchantress of the Temple and Super Heavy Samurai Piercer and Parallel Exceed are going to be semi-limited. Whereas King of the Swamp and Prank Kids Meow Meow Mew are having the limit lifted. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these cards, with the white and the blue here, yeah, white cards. It's funny, the text is in blue here. Blue cards for which the maximum number has decreased, white cards for which the maximum number has increased. Well, if you're going to make that comment, perhaps it would be better just to repeat the part here, or have this part be in white, or have just this part be in white. Seems like some odd formatting choice there, but whatever. Who cares about formatting in a collectible card game? Let's see, we still have the festival going. I didn't play any off screen. Instead, I've been making footage playing a game called Divide by Sheep, which is a very weird title because it sounds like it would be a pun on something, but it really isn't. Like, divide by sleep sounds like it would be a phrase, but it really isn't a phrase I've ever heard of, and it doesn't really mean anything. Sheep and sleep are easy words to confuse, certainly, but excuse me. But yeah, there's just not a lot of that there's just not a lot of meaning behind any of that, come to think of it. And the flippantness of the name is kind of also probably a testament to the flippantness of the difficulty in the levels of Divide by Sheep. There are definitely just some puzzles here in Divide by Sheep. Alright, so this one has ended. Did we get far enough to even get the reward we wanted? Yes. So that solves one problem. Then this will be the festival we play, and this one we have not won with yet. And we were playing with our own slightly modified Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck. We'll try that once, but I probably need to jump back to using a loner deck. But yeah, it is such a weird game, Divide by Sheep, in that there really are only 7 positions that you can have platforms on that are, like, if we were to draw it out here, and there's a position here that's a platform potentially. There can not also be a platform there. I mean, there can also be nothing there. So you'd have one here, 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 and then like here and here. And yeah, maybe I didn't draw up that quite right, but and then what you do is you get groups of sheep to jump from platforms to platforms, and the main thing it's selling itself on is that in a rather small number of levels there will be a laser wall, and when the sheep go through the laser wall they'll get cut in half. And so then you are dealing with fractions, but only 1/2 fractions, and you're dealing with platforms that have different maximum number of cells in which you can have a sheep or half of a sheep stand on, and it's all in service of getting the correct number of sheep or half sheeps to the right position in a lot of times. For the most part, that's what it is. And then they throw in wolves that eat sheep. And then they throw in TNT platforms that explode if nothing is standing on the platform, so it's like a pressure trigger trap. And then they throw in pigs very late in the game. You have to be past the halfway point before you even see pigs, and pigs will land on top of sheep and kill them always. And most of the time you are trying to kill the sheep by the time you get to the halfway point of the game. And the game by default is very bloody and gory, and you can turn off the blood, and honestly you should just turn off the blood. It just does not make sense for the game to be this gory when it's a math game that by all other rights really should just be a but by all other rights, it should just be a kid-friendly math game, like number crunchers from so many decades previously. And certainly that also, I think, highlights how the game industry has really failed to try to advertise itself and target itself to an educator's market, whether that's parents or schools. And in fairness, parents and schools have also just objectively rejected the idea of having educational games exist or embracing them. Teachers don't really want to buy or learn new software or do anything with technology for the most part. And parents are not really. Parents are too busy, I would say, is probably the general explanation as to why they don't try and shove more educational software, if it even existed, into the faces of kids. Educational software has failed miserably. There have been some small attempts with like the Minecraft Educational Edition, and then the insanity of the Assassin's Creed Educational Edition, which there's just no way any school is going to approve the purchase of a game that has assassin in the name. Like, they really should have renamed it and just used the same art assets. It would have been perfectly fine, frankly, if they just called it Ubisoft Educational Edition or Ubisoft Presents Egypt, which that's what they did it originally around, was Egypt and the art assets they had done around all that. Well, I suppose it's still worth it to just keep on filling up the graveyard here. Summon this. We'll see if this guy can stop this ability from happening. But yeah, there are, specifically in Divide by Sheep though, there are some major problems around it being a math game, even if it isn't really kid friendly when it really should be. Just in the fact that there are definitely points where you should be able to either personally write down a number on the screen, or it should be telling you numbers on the screen. Just when you subtract and lose one sheep, a number, a -1, should appear on the screen and pop up above that. The number of spaces on the platform, there should be some option to toggle the number of spaces on the platform to be shown just above the platform. It is spending way too much effort hiding the fact that it's a math puzzle game when it blatantly is obvious it's a math puzzle game. It's also not getting into anything really more than addition and subtraction, really. Sometimes it's addition and subtraction based on the maximum number of platforms on or a maximum number of spaces on a single platform. So you're running into limits, a high limit. No real way to run into a low limit, as far as I can tell. And fairly quickly in covering Divide by Sheep, which is all I've really been doing lately. Although I have also been, the other thing I've been doing is watching Hulu, A Shop for Killers, a Korean drama, which is maybe a bit of a slow start, but it gets more interesting as say in the halfway point is where I am now. And I've also been just trying to tease myself back into working on my smart on-air sign by just doing some research around ESP32 programming and seeing where the community of the makers are with that, which I really wouldn't have evolved that much in 2 or 3 months, but yeah, I'm trying to get myself back into being hyped to work on that project, if there's any hope there for that. Speaking of makerspace, it is still very, very obvious that the Raspberry Pis at this point are fairly dead, particularly since RetroPie really hasn't put out a new update for in a really long time, it feels like. In Emulation Station DE, which is supposed to be, I guess, the desktop edition, is now available for purchase through the Amazon App Store for Android. It's a little expensive for the audience of people who are going to be just playing pirated old games on it and ROMs on it. Yeah, so to pay like $5. I reinstalled the Amazon App Store, which I haven't used that in years, just to see if maybe I had some like coins or something to to get it for free, but unfortunately not. I don't believe the coin system even existed when I last installed Amazon's App Store. I was using it when they had the actually free branding and promotions going on as far as free games. But yeah, while it would be nice to have Emulation Station on an Android phone, you basically still need something bigger, a bigger screen, and you need a controller to use Emulation Station properly. It's designed to be controlled by a controller as far as the interface, so in most people's usages of it, you would be putting a nice interface on your phone to then run other kinds of emulators, and the number of emulators on Android are probably limited to fewer than what would be available on a PC x86 AMD 64 CPU. Yeah, I keep calling them x86, but they really are AMD 64 CPUs these days. They have been for years. But yeah, RetroPie, Emulation Station, both of them I don't think really upgraded or done anything new. If a Raspberry Pi 6 was announced tomorrow, it probably wouldn't be impressive. If anything, they probably need to just make a Raspberry Pi that is cheaper instead of trying to make one that is more powerful. You could make something more powerful that's the same price, and that would be a better offering, but it still is probably not going to be anywhere close to the way more expensive Steam Deck, but the way more expensive Steam Deck with an OLED screen is almost certainly what you're really going to look for. Yeah, the only thing I could think you could do with the Raspberry Pi, particularly for emulation, and that's what was getting a lot of its fandom and its coverage from, would be to manage to put, I don't know, like an FPGA in it, or just a massive amount of CPU power in it, so that you can guarantee not only that all Nintendo 64 games, but also all PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games are playable. And frankly, you probably would have to put so much power into it that you would approach the point where you could play Wii games and GameCube games and PlayStation 3 games. Yeah. And then at a certain point, I don't think the emulators even exist in at least good states to play PlayStation 4 or Xbox One games or Xbox Series games or PlayStation 5 games. But I bet there probably is a decent level of progress that's been made for at least PC emulators with the Dolphin emulator to play Switch games. So I'd assume the Dolphin emulator would be the emulator to play Switch games on, if there is even an emulator to play Switch games on. You also get into that middle thought, certainly, where Raspberry Pis 5, even the most recent Raspberry Pis, still are probably weaker than a Nintendo Switch. So we're entering the last year of the Nintendo Switch being really the relevant console, and Switches can be hacked. So you might be in a better position to take an old Switch, hack it, and then allow yourself to play not only Switch games, but then ROMs of, I imagine, pretty much anything else. What is this gonna do? This is gonna let me make an equip spell, I guess. And then this will let me add a fire character to my hand. And if I knew which correct fire character to pick, I would be in a better position. I guess we'll take this guy. So yeah, the fact that you can get Emulation Station on an Android really, I think, would only be helpful is if you had a tablet you wanted to dedicate to that, and you had a wireless controller you wanted to dedicate to that. It still probably wouldn't be that good of an experience. Maybe you could dedicate a phone with a USB-C to HDMI out and plug it into a TV, and then you might be able to take advantage of spending only $5 to buy Emulation Station, set up an Android build of a bunch of ROMs, and then take an old phone and just hand it to a kid and say, plug this into your TV and then connect this Bluetooth controller, this PlayStation 5 controller, I assume is what you would use in that case. Or you could put a hub in it, a USB-C hub that had HDMI out, and you could plug in a controller to it if you wanted to do that. But that certainly would be more wired than you would like. Honestly though, if you're going to do that, you almost certainly are going to need a hub anyways, because you're going to want to probably plug in extra storage, and you're more likely to have like two 512 gigabyte SD cards than one 1 terabyte SD card if you want to put a lot of ROMs on it. And you're going to need to put in power, more importantly. So yeah, it is almost certainly the case that you would need a hub. We're at the end of this festival, it's pretty obvious. And thus, people are just giving up more. Yeah, so that's a long, windy way of just talking about playing Divide by Sheep. Oh, what I was gonna say, and I don't think I actually got to this point, was it definitely early into covering that game occurred to me that you could make a game called Cut the Cheese that would just be the exact same game, but less violent and gory. And then it would just be like little white mice and brown mice. The brown mice act like the pigs, the white mouse act like the wolves in Divide by Sheep, and then the pieces of cheese would act like the sheep. And then when a piece of cheese went through a laser wall, it wouldn't really be that big a deal if it got cut in half. And yeah, you really wouldn't change anything else from that. Yeah, let's just end the turn there. So yeah, you could definitely think of some creative ideas as far as just how you would make divide by sheep E for everyone instead of T for teen, which is really where I think it lands with the bloodiness and the goriness of cutting a sheep in half for no good reason. Speaking of ideas, I mentioned in previous streams after playing Cracking the Cryptic, which I'm still watching their YouTube channel more. It's really a great thing to get bored by, to fall asleep to. But yeah, after playing Cracking the Cryptic, the app on Steam, and watching more of Cracking the Cryptic's YouTube channel, which is run by 2 people. And honestly, I thought one was more of the primary guy and the other guy was more of a backup, but it does seem like they kind of tag team and do have more of an equal share of screen time. But yeah, I mentioned after doing that I thought a rogue-like game or roguelite game around Sudoku might make a lot of sense. And so then I did do a quick search to see if there are just open source Sudoku generators, and there are plenty of open source Sudoku generators in plenty of different languages. So if I was gonna be crazy and try and make a video game that actually sell on Steam Direct that combined roguelike elements to solving Sudoku, the Sudoku part of the code could easily be implemented, or relatively easily be implemented. It honestly would be the art and trying to use the Godot engine, which is what I would try to do, to just make it colorful and just the amount of polish. Like, a vertical slice prototype could probably be done in like 24 hours, 48 hours. If I was really good at programming, probably knowing myself, it would be months and months to polish it completely to even get to a vertical slice pitch idea. But what has occurred to me really is I need to just start making like a list of ideas of video games and things, like ideas of projects in general, and just make a little journal of it. Will anything come about from that journal? No, but at some point, if somebody needed ideas for video games, I could just pull out that list and say, here's ideas for projects, here's the ideas for video games. And it wouldn't just be video game projects. I should just have this list of things I'm not really going to ever accomplish on my own, or even begin to attempt on my own, but these still feel like good ideas enough that if somebody needed to make a pitch, in particular, I'm thinking, I might at some point have a niece or nephew that wants to program a video game or wants a school project that I could say, well, here's an idea, here's something you can do. Well, somebody put hello on the chat and then deleted their comment. I think it was Shadow Master, so I don't know what the deal with that is. I'm noticing that I must have minimized the second OBS. That is the weirdest part of this dual streaming, is that you just can't minimize the second OBS, otherwise the stream chat for Twitch just gets minimized too. So yeah, it would make a lot of sense to be more organized and just have a list. Now inherently, if I did make a list of all the ideas of projects and video game ideas, it is going to just turn into a list of semi-failures and fairly depressing list at that point. But you know what, you're just gonna have to accept that. I imagine I would just have to accept that and say, hey, here's a bunch of ideas that I know I never am gonna do. And I really wish I had started doing that list. As I get older, this is something that I think everybody should encourage kids to do, is just have an idea journal, keep records of what you're thinking about, what you're doing. It doesn't really need to be a deep emotional diary or journal like that, anything like that, but things you care about, you should probably write down and keep a record of it. Because I know there was a whole bunch of ideas I had when I was in junior high and elementary school around video games I wanted to make back then. And some of them I kind of drew pictures, but I've probably lost that. But then there also was just a lot of ideas that are probably just going to be forgotten to time, and have been forgotten to time. Yeah. I don't know if I should really tell this story, but there was one game I had an idea of, and this is probably me just being a precocious little boy in the literal sense of the word precocious, in that I wanted, and I remember, like, this must have been like 6th grade. I was still in elementary school, and I was talking with other kids of my age, and so I wasn't the only precocious one there. And one of the ideas that we were talking about, or that I in part came up with, I'm not sure if, yeah, I think I came up with it, would have been based off of that kind of Pirates of Dark Water cartoon that must have been popular there. And I was proposing the idea of a video game where it was sword fighting as like a fighter with actual like clothing damage, to the point where in my thought that you would be stripping the damsel in distress. And honestly, this is Zorro. These are ideas that certainly non-precocious little boys would have had decades before. But yeah, for lack of a better term, we were perverting out on the playground in the 6th grade, and it wasn't just guys. There was at least 1 or 2 girls in the conversation too. But honestly, sword fighting games even decades later have not been good, and I could see like a hentai style game out there where it's sword fighting, but it would break the clothes. But they don't go with sword fighting because swords are sharp, and then you'd be doing actual damage and cutting people. And so the concept eventually evolved, or that concept didn't go anywhere because it was just a dumb idea I had when I was a kid. And that's probably one of the ideas that would have been blacked out in the journal. But yeah, there are definitely games like that. Similar games to that. Like the idea of, was that Gal Gun? You're doing a gun shooter and it does little love hearts of damage to anime girls, and they lose their clothes. And they're definitely Shinran Kagura games. So yeah, I guess there eventually was a Shinran Kagura game that has at least one character with a sword that does damage, that loses clothing. So it took decades for that concept to really be created. And certainly when I was talking about that game, it would have been absolutely awful had it actually been created. Now Shadow Master reposted hello, and then he says any use deck now. I have no idea what that means. So I can't really respond to that. Sorry. Yeah. When I would have been in like 6th grade, it probably would have been somewhere around the end of the NES, the beginning of the Super NES era. Like the level of graphics would have been crazy bad. But at that time, that also kind of highlights where you probably could have gotten away with something like that a little bit easier when the graphics would have just been pixely and it really would have just been implied skin. Even if you had, say, tried to do the same kind of game where it's pirates stripping winches with their swords. If you tried to do that even in the Tomb Raider era, that low polygon era, it would have been over the top for a gimmick. And it definitely would have just been adults only. And even now, it would still be kind of inappropriate, or at least poorly received, if you tried to make a hyper-realistic pirate game. And I guess I'm mentioning a pirate game in part because Sea of Thieves and the other one, Skull and Bones, both are finally out now. Skull and Bones is finally out. Sea of Thieves has been out either in early access or what's felt like a multiplayer only early access that is never going to end. But yeah, even if you were to do somewhat realistic graphics, the game there would be unacceptable. And I would imagine the reason why I was precocious in the true sense of the term and the other kids were precocious is because in that area where I grew up, there just was a rather lack of open, frank discussion as far as like growing into a young puberty and sexuality. Like even having the talk was like unlikely to happen for most of the kids in that area. And yeah, that doesn't stop kids from thinking about sex and nudity and girls. And frankly, at that time I probably was just interested in seeing a boob and didn't even know what any of the lower genitalia was all about. But yeah, it just doesn't get talked, and that doesn't stop kids from thinking about it. It only makes them think about it more, because it's so exotic at that point. And yeah, I'll throw out there, I don't believe or have any memories of being mistreated, I'll say, by any adult. So I don't believe my precociousness in that conversation came from any inappropriate interaction from an adult or even an older child or anything like that. It came, I think, very naturally, as naturally as any of that's ever going to come. Of course, that is also the catch-22, is I can say, well, I don't remember any of that, and then somebody who wants to live in their own beliefs will say, well, we'll just then assume I blacked something out. Again, I don't have any memory. I don't believe that's the case at all. It definitely is the case for a lot of people. It's just not my story. And we're supposed to be talking about video games, and I'm barely on topic here. So let's go ahead through the video game news. We might as well get an early start. These last few streams have been really long, and I do believe it is just going to be the case that it is going to be very long going forward. As long as we still have news to happen. I have seen Video Game Donkey cover Skull and Bones, and it looks like it's a garbage game. Looks like it's just really in terrible shape, and at a certain point there's just going to be a case where it would have been better to cut and run and cut your losses, and now really doesn't feel like this was the point to do that. It feels like it should have been 3 or 4 years ago. I do believe Skull and Bones may have been in development for about 10 years, which is just ridiculous. But even comparing Skull and Bones to Black Flag, which is what it's supposed to be, it is failing miserably in those comparisons, and Black Flag is just being sold as the better product. So yeah, I feel like pirate games in particular run into problems as a concept anyways. You really, I think, are missing a point in that pirate movies, pirate stories, pirate comics, all of which would have been super popular before superhero comics, and before gangster comics and spooky comics, and before before that would be pirates. So you're talking basically 3 generations back, and somewhere in the before gangster would also have been western. So it's really 4 generations back as far as what would have been really popular. Is maybe there's a little bit of overlap between westerns and pirate stories, but very noticeably, pirate movies, pirate radio plays, pirate books, pirate comics, what do they all have connected besides just being about pirates? They have a story. So if you're going to make a multiplayer game that doesn't have really a story to speak of, you've got a real problem there, that you've missed the whole gimmick behind what you're trying to do. The Pirates of the Caribbean movie series has been rather successful because it has a good TV series story behind it, whereas the Pirates of the Caribbean ride is only successful because it's just a nice slow ride at Disney World, Disneyland. But even at that, with the resurgence of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, there has not been any attempt to make any other pirate movies. And that's got to tell you something. And inherently, just like westerns, just like mob movies, there isn't room out there to bring back these old genres. Yeah. It's very likely we'll never have another major western. People will try here and there, but we'll never really have major successes or major resurgence around westerns. Even as we're probably going to see the death of Superman. Not the death of Superman, the death of superhero stories and comics and movies in favor of something else. That something else is probably not going to be something we've seen before. You can always go sci-fi and futuristic, but then the sci-fi of, say, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan is nowhere close to the sci-fi of a much more recent sci-fi movie. Say, The Creator, which is a streaming movie I watched recently. Chinese streaming movie. But yeah, as far as trying to do pirate games in video game form, I think first and foremost you gotta start with story. I think most games need to refocus on having story and not trying to just monopolize the player's time to an extreme amount, which, yeah, that just increasingly is not what people seem to want. It's not what people are buying. But yeah, I could definitely have told you just from my initial reactions around Skull and Bones and Sea of Thieves is that both of those games are not going to be games that would have held my attention that long. And so with both of those games trying to be games of services, trying to be multiplayer games, that's it felt like it was a waste of resources when they first were shown, and it still feels like it has been a huge waste of resources. I guess the question would become, can Ubisoft bounce back from that in any way? Will Ubisoft learn its lesson? Is this possibly Ubisoft turning a corner and saying, well, we gotta shovel this project out so that we can be done with it? Or is there just going to be either nothing else coming out from Ubisoft for a real long time, or are they going to just try and double down on Sea of Skull and Bones? If history is to tell us anything, I would imagine they're just going to try and double down on Skull and Bones in the same way that they have doubled down on Assassin's Creed and driven that into the ground. On the other hand, Ubisoft did put out that Prince of Persia game, so at least one of their games is slightly different now. At least they experimented with one game. interesting. But I do want a good pirate game. I don't want to get taken the wrong way there. I would like to see a successful pirate game. I just need to see some real story there. There needs to be a group of pirates, first of all. And I think even Pirates of the Caribbean perhaps missed that trick in particular. But yeah, there needs to be a crew, a group of pirates. Maybe they're on different crews. They'll all have interesting things. At a certain level, you could make a pirate game that is not too different from a good Saints Row game, in that you can have several interesting characters there. And each of them could have their own characters, their own personality, their own storyline and tale. You could think on the terms of DLC and expansion to add new members to a crew in a season 2, and each of those characters could then have their own backstory. But yeah, several interesting characters would be very helpful. And maybe you would play as the nameless captain, who's then doing a Mass Effect type thing, which at a certain level Mass Effect isn't too far from a pirate game, where you are doing loyalty missions for your pirate crew. That would kind of make sense. And then you could certainly have just like several different types of characters. And in a funny way, a pirate game could be rather diverse too. Like you can have female pirates and nobody's going to complain about that. You can have African and Asian pirates and nobody's going to complain about that. It might be not 100% accurate if they're all on the same crew, but you could certainly make a storyline that works that way. As for the actual gameplay, that is, I think, also a problem with pirate games, though, is that you want to have these like ship battle conflicts, and we just have not figured out how to program ship battle conflicts particularly well. So the default thought would be to turn it to a first-person shooter. Unfortunately, if you're going to set it as a pirate game in a realistic past, you're not going to have a automatic guns and laser weapons that can fire bullets over and over again. So either you write an interesting story about how this is in an alternate universe where piracy is still a big deal and you still dress like old-timey pirates, but you have futuristic guns, or you make everybody really have to save their bullets because they can only fire once every minute or so, which that would probably be boring. Or you figure out some other way of doing it. Have a time travel element where weapons from the future end up in pirates' hands. I think most people want it to be somewhat realistic, but you can have a magical element too. You easily and probably should just have like a voodoo lady or a voodoo guy even that could magically enchant pistols so that they could shoot bullets over and over again. You could even have like a Cthulhu-esque element, but probably not Cthulhu, just go with your Kraken and your giant animals. You could have a lot of fishing and whaling going on in a pirate game, and that might be somewhat offensive, but it'd give you something else to do. And yeah, the amount of time to load a cannon and shoot a cannon was probably not being accurately depicted in Skull and Bones and Sea of Thieves anyways, even now, so that they're already, I imagine, cheating there. So I could continue to play here, and it would just be a case of trying to get 3 more victories to get to this point. And this ends in 2 days, so when I stream next time, it'll probably be done. So then the real question, I guess, would just come down to, if I link summon 4 more times, I'll get a reward. If I synchro summon 8 more times, I'll get a reward. Otherwise, I've pretty much done everything. I should probably just play 1 more time, though. We haven't gotten all the daily quests done. And then it's probably not worth even checking the solo here to see what the new gate opens. Takes so long to even scroll down. Cursed Golden Land. Interesting. So I know this card was a heavily highlighted card, I think about 2 years ago when this game first came out. And it's taking that long to just catch up and make a solo story around that. Alright, so let's play 1 more time and then... yeah. Keep on playing, I guess, with this. Or we'll try a different... let's try a different lunar deck just for some variety's sake. Yeah. I definitely would have to give it a lot more thought. And I am not 100% sold that there is a way to make a pirate game. I do think probably Mass Effect is your target, though. You're gonna have to figure out a way to shoot slingshots and blow darts and pistols, or magically enchanted pistols, to get into a lot of first-person shooting. You're gonna have to have a lot of skeletons, a lot of ghouls, not particularly zombies, or whatever. What were the ones in Mass Effect called? Reapers, I think. But yeah, go with like loyalty missions. So I'm thinking Mass Effect 2. Cover-based shooting would be behind trees on islands in a pirate game, which could work, but probably be better to not emphasize on cover-based shooting and instead just run and gun shooting. You probably engage with more animals. Just have like panthers, tigers, wolves, monkeys, all in the forests, potentially being threats themselves. Then you could also hunt on top of fishing, which would make a lot of sense there too. To have half the missions be you're going to some island to hunt some rare form of animal, and then you're taking the pelts from those animals back to your home base. Spice trades and trading should play a role, but I imagine most trade missions should probably just end with you stealing the spices and elements from some other ship. You probably need some kind of like barrel collecting mini game to scoop up floating barrels, because that would be a common thing that would have happened. Is a pirate ship would approach a non-pirate vessel, a trading vessel, and the traders would just start throwing their valuables in barrels overboard in the hopes that the pirate ship would just stop and pick up the barrels and leave the ship alone, which I think probably worked a lot of times too. You could go all around the world and have all kinds of different ships for what that is worth. But you almost certainly are going to have fast travel moving between like an Asian ocean area and an English ocean area. But yeah, to wrap up here, I still just really heavily question whether pirates are ever going to be popular as much as I think people at Ubisoft and people at Microsoft thought. And I think it's very much a case that the people at Ubisoft and Microsoft were falling in love with their own product way more than they should have. Anyways, to start with video game news, the Halo co-creator Marcus Leto, or Lido? I guess that's Lido, has left EA Battlefield studio that he founded. Lido was leading one of several EA studios shepherding the Battlefield franchise. Which this highlights several things really, as far as just the inconsistency of where you might work. Do I control this? But yeah, this really highlights that here Lido co-created the Halo franchise at Bungie and performed both as art director and creative director roles when he founded Ridgeline Games in 2021. The studio was formed to work on new single-player iterations of the Battlefield series alongside other studios who were working on multiplayer and spin-offs. He has now left that company, so you could take that to mean one of two things. Either things didn't work out and he's just going somewhere else, which is a lot of options, or you could speculate deeper that maybe he's been enticed to return to Bungie, although the Bungie that exists now is not really the Bungie. It's not 100% the Bungie that was then, certainly, when they were making Halo. And it's still important to point out that Microsoft owns the intellectual property of Halo, so Bungie has been working on Destiny, and Destiny 2 is coming to its end. But yeah, it definitely feels like several different possibilities exist here. He could also just be retiring. Now, this may also be in part affected by the fact that now that Microsoft owns Activision Blizzard, and thus they own the Call of Duty series, Battlefield as a series may be at its very end, and there may not be enough motivation or enough of a chance to to make yet another Battlefield. It's also worth pointing out that, well, I'm not sure that this was the guy that made the controversial statements around doubling down around the Battlefield game that had the female soldier with a gun and an amputee as being advertised and shown in trailers. I think Battlefield really was the last bastion of realistic games that for World War II simulators that people wanted to play, and that's when Battlefield is not set in the future, like Battlefield 2042, which had a disappointing launch. But yeah, I think Battlefield maybe lost its audience. Of course, this also could just be an EA issue in particular, because everybody knows that EA doesn't really invest in enough games and doesn't really make good enough games. It is one of the worst companies, although at this point calling EA one of the worst companies is more a meme than the reality, because every game company has gotten terrible. And here's kind of an example of how game companies, I think, get terrible. Larian's director, who responds, I think, far too much, and probably is working his way to being the new Randy Pitchford as far as just tweeting too much and saying things too publicly. Although perhaps not anywhere as controversial yet as Randy Pitchford was. And in fairness, Randy Pitchford has been quiet for many years now, and he's actually done a very good job of just keeping his wild statements private, or to himself. But yeah, we're seeing this increasing trend of game developers trying to play the victim, when in modern days, with everybody connected on the internet and any troll being able to make a sock puppet account and insult or threaten somebody, you just have to kind of take those blows on the chin and realize that the internet's not really the real world. There's a big difference between somebody even mailing you a threat versus some random person on some website saying something that you could potentially take in as threatening. And then the phrase toxicity, or being toxic, is just a super nebulous term at this point. It can mean anything to anyone, really. And so then you get these split headlines where it's Baldur's Gate exec condemns threats and toxicity against devs, period. And then there should be another headline, Baldur's Gate 3 is working on mod support, period. He also has confirmed in the subheadline that Baldur's Gate 3 has way over 10 million players. This was in a lengthy thread on Twitter/X. It's working on official cross-platform mod support for Baldur's Gate 3, which I think is really the thing you would want to focus on and talk about. And then as far as threats and toxicity, you should you pretty much just have to assume that any big popular game company is going to get some of that, and you just file that away, and you're probably better off to not have a director have direct access to a personal Twitter account that's public, that people could see and reply to at least, and instead have just a community manager / secretary equivalent looking at all those comments and filing away threats. Yeah, if I was working any job where I felt I needed a secretary, I definitely would instruct that secretary, I won't just say her, could be a him, too, or a they. But yeah, I would definitely instruct my secretary to not inform me about any threats. If threats are credible or feel credible, then I would tell the secretary to mail it and contact the police on my behalf, and just leave me out of it. Like, the whole point of having a secretary is that you are too busy to deal with things yourself. These threats and toxicity are perfect examples of things you should not be seeing or dealing with yourself. Maybe I would ask for just a general idea of how many threats or how toxic it is, but I definitely wouldn't be paying it much attention. Meanwhile, it all still hovers when a game company comes around and says there's threats and toxicity. It always comes around like it's potentially just, I won't say SJWs inherently, but just wimpy people that want to be victims, want to play the victim. People who are looking to be victims no matter what the reality of the situation is. And frankly, that's a lot of people. And I guess I'll just leave it at that without reading any further. Because I personally don't even care to go into the details of what the threats are, or what the toxicity is. I mean, I get plenty of news of actual attacks and actual violence that happen, and none of that news ever is in the field of video games. Yeah. In fact, I don't think I can name a single instance of anybody in the mainstream video game development world actually being attacked physically. Like, yeah, I don't think I can think of a single instance. It must have happened. And certainly there's like stories of, like, just to mention Randy Pitchford, was an accusation that Randy Pitchford shoved some one of his employees, which that would be video game boss abusing video game employee, not really a fan assaulting anybody. Yeah, I don't think there ever has been a single story. For as big as the video game industry is, I don't think there's been a single story where anybody has been arrested for stalking an actual game developer or threatening a game company or doing anything like that. So that whole nonsense they talk about video game causes violence, I mean, it's just not true, first of all, but I think it's proven at this point. Yeah. If somebody knows in the comments, let me know. Has there actually been a story where anybody in the video game industry has actually been stalked, assaulted, anything more than threatened, and like, or even credibly threatened, if as far as somebody had actual stockpiles of weapons and got arrested with that? There's been way more stories like that for like YouTubers threatening, assaulting each other. Certainly. And certainly there's been a few stories as far as Hollywood celebrities. One of the things I think that really prevents that from ever really happening is the fact that video game developers tend not to really go anywhere where the public are, or even be known as far as what they look like. Yeah. It's not like there's an inherent Comic-Con equivalent where game developers all go and can be seen. There's a little bit of that at like PAX, I imagine, but not any real high level of it. Moving on, I guess. Video Games Chronicles has an article here. Helldivers 2 has bucked the UK physical game trend as weekly sales rise for the second week. The game has been selling more copies per week since release. Interesting that it's physical too. Like, although I could see people thinking that they might have a higher chance of actually getting into a server if they buy the physical game and don't have to download it. But I think mostly this probably just boils down to Helldivers 2 seemingly being really, really popular despite its many problems. I think they also said in a different story that they were cranking up the maximum to like 800,000 players in total to make the servers bigger. Let's see. The Final Fantasy music legend Nobu Uematsu doesn't think he'll ever compose a whole game again. He provided the main theme for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. You know, composing an entire soundtrack yourself probably isn't really a goal that you should try to go for. It's probably too much work, and just from the consumer's standpoint, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not particularly great output. Like, we are very much in a different position than it used to be, where people would try to make albums and records and have multiple songs, and honestly I think CDs may have had even more like more time and more songs on them anyways, but particularly for video games, since you're working in that limitation of making video game music and not just trying to make both like really good hit songs and then a bunch of filler songs that you would have in an album, a CD, or a record. It does really feel like you should have 3 or 4 different composers with 3 or 4 different styles, and that there should be some like high action songs. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is kind of an example. That's a trilogy of games. It would make a lot of sense to have at least 3 composers for those 3 different games and maybe mix and match the music between the 3 different games. I would also argue that there's a lot of cheating that happened. If you have like the Beatles, well, there's potentially 2, 3, 4 different people writing songs, or at least contributing to writing songs in a band. If you're a solo album person, there is very possibly that you have a bunch of shadow writers working for it. there's a meme out there where some modern pop song allegedly had 12 people write it, and the lyrics for the song are just pathetically repetitive and simplistic, and then they compare it to like Queen, a Queen song that, or the lead singer of Queen wrote himself, I think. I'm probably naming the wrong band person. Inherently, I think it's important to also highlight that the timelines are completely different there. I imagine a musician is hired within a year or two of the release of a game, and they aren't given potentially 4 years or longer to make the entire soundtrack of a video game. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of times the soundtrack composers are hired only like 6 months before the release of a game, and that's going to create a weird situation where either composers are going to have songs already in their head and already written that they're just going to try and cram into a video game, and then it's not going to feel as custom, or it's going to have them just rush to make music. Whereas I imagine a video game composer, like any composer, could take 3 or 4 years to make songs, and they could just be working on songs for their entire career and trying them over and over again until they find one that succeeds greatly and is fully polished. That's why you have musicians like Prince and Michael Jackson that, when they die, end up having large collections of songs that never get published, and then inherently when they do get published past their death, they aren't that good of songs because they didn't have the polish and the quality. I don't think I've ever, again, I don't know that much about music, but I don't think there's ever been a release of a song that, or an album after an artist died, that was considered good. Back to Uematsu, though, he's most famous for composing soundtracks for the first 9 Final Fantasy games and working on numerous subsequent entries. Well, the first 6 or so Final Fantasy games, though, would have been the 8-bit, fairly repetitive NES, Super NES games. So making that kind of 8-bit music and limiting yourself to the physical requirements of the hardware requirements of 8-bit and 16-bit systems is probably a little bit easier to do than composing new music for new games, particularly now that Steam is promoting their Steam Audio, which is going to be more 3D in the way it's designed, and certainly audio in general is just trying to be more 3D and more surround sound. And even if it's not trying to be more surround sound, it's going to have a much wider dynamic range, for lack of a better term, in which you can just have different kinds of samples of different kinds of instruments and different kinds of instruments playing on it. It's the difference, frankly. The first 6 Final Fantasy games, the 8-bit Final Fantasy games, would have had 8-bit music, whereas we're at, as a direct comparison, you could easily do 24-bit music in games these days. You could probably push it to floating 32-bit floating 64-bit music. The number of samples you could do for 8 bits are going to be really low for NES, Super NES games, where the number of samples could be almost infinite in a modern game. And we have weirdly created a whole nostalgia around 8-bit music, when in reality it is the equivalent of listening to music that's being played on a synthesizer compared to listening to music being played by a full orchestra. And there's just no real comparison there if you were to run the numbers. Both can be pleasant because music appreciation really is just an opinion. But if you were to look at it just by the numbers, one instrument cannot create the same deep swelling variety of sound that an orchestra can. And even orchestras are a little weird because you're having multiple instruments all playing the same note, trying to synchronize and synergize with each other. In many cases, it is much less often that you have a big chunk of the orchestra playing one part of the music and then another chunk of the orchestra playing something else. Yep. I will say one thing that's slightly surprising here is you have your standard Japanese old guy, and he's probably not even that old, but he has kept up with the technology pretty well. He's got a laptop, he's got a piano here, he's got an electric piano here, he's got a keyboard over here, which probably is going to yet another computer. It definitely could have been a case where he was writing everything down in a Japanese sheet music style, which those are weird, if I'm remembering them right. And he could have just been handing all of the technological effort to a secretary, and that would be slow, certainly, to compose music that way. So we didn't make that much more progress as far as the festivals go. We need to link summon 2 more times. We need to synchro summon at least 1 more time. So I could play off screen here. I probably won't. I think I'm probably good enough where I am. And these battle passes still don't matter at all. We will easily reach level 100 before 55 days has passed. Alright. Let's see. Video Games Chronicles is doubling down on previous rumors that the Switch 2, quote-unquote, is targeting a March 2025, and it was delayed to avoid shortages. This is from Nikkei. What is Nikkei? Is that the Japanese stock market, or what? Apparently it's a Japanese news publication. Okay. Of course, the problem with those kinds of rumors, particularly when you're crossing over to a different language, is that it may very well be a case that Nikkei is reporting on the exact same rumors from the exact same sources that made the rumors originally, and just expanding and adding information that they're just kind of assuming. In the hacker space and tech space in particular, there was this news article that was just very poorly researched that said thousands, if not millions, of smart toothbrushes had been hacked and were being used in a DDoS. People fairly quickly started to research that and try and find the sources for it, and they found that actually the news source had just been translated from like Swedish to English inappropriately, and really the article was saying that theoretically thousands of smart toothbrushes could be hacked. And then since then, there's been one hacker who has said that he has found a smart toothbrush that could be hacked, yes, but it doesn't mean any really have been. The much higher danger would be that thousands of smart toothbrushes or any other smart device that would have been programmed in China and built in China would just come with rootkits. There is a massive amount of smart tablets and things that come from China that have rootkits on them. Android audio devices that have rootkits on them. Now, are those rootkits there intentionally, or was it just one Chinese company stole the Android operating system image and copied it to another thing? Or are the rootkits literally just installed there because it's so hard to get root to install your own software that they did that? I haven't heard a lot of stories though of even Chinese products just inherently having spyware on them, or at least being caught with having spyware on them. And a rootkit and spyware are different. Rootkit just means they put something there so that they can access the root file system of the operating system, and frankly being able to do that is very helpful. Samsung phones inherently have some kind of rootkit on them so that you can transfer and back up your phone. Otherwise, the Samsung backup, Samsung Sync app, I believe it's called, would not allow you to back up and transfer your phone. And Apple phones have inherently some kind of rootkit on them that allows you to transfer and back up your Apple phone to a new Apple phone. But yeah, I'm getting distracted here. I really would like to get some official confirmation from Nintendo as far as just what the next Nintendo console is going to look like and what it's going to be called. I'm a little bit more interested in what it looks like. I kind of don't care what it's called as far as the name. I have some speculation. There's rumor that it will be an 8-inch screen, which would mean the Joy-Cons wouldn't quite fit. I suspect there's a good chance that Joy-Cons will be just attached to the next screen and not detachable. There's a decent argument that it won't have an IR transmitter receiver. There's a decent argument that it won't have an NFC tag reader, although it probably is only a few pennies to add an NFC tag reader somewhere, but it was only used for amiibos and barely at that. And there's a decent chance that the cartridges will be different shape or size, but maybe not. Maybe they'll be the same. And then I'm not really expecting much more. I do think it is just going to be kind of a incremental improvement. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the Bravely Default producer teases an announcement later this year. Tomoya Asano says there will be developments in the Bravely series. Bravely Default is yet another one of these Japanese RPG games that I'm not 100% sure who the characters are or what the story is. Here we're seeing some moth fairy character, which that is an interesting way certainly to depict a fairy, to have moth furry like wings. And I can tell by the color palette that it is one of these more modern Japanese fantasy games with the brown color palette, which seems to be in vogue at the moment, somewhat off for a lot of games. Epic Game Store. Oh, I wanted to talk about this. There's this advertisement here, confidential from Greenville Police Department personnel only. Dead by Daylight, All Things Wicked comes March 12th. I have no idea who this character is. And I have no idea what Greenville Police Department, from what franchise this is supposed to be. So I probably need to do some research. She looks like an intriguing character here with the pink and black goth appearance, and then you have this monster character behind that, and so I almost wonder if this is supposed to be the character, and I just don't recognize this character either, and this is just supposed to be some random victim character. Maybe we could get in the comments here, and that's not what I meant to do. Yeah, maybe we could see in the comments if we could get a general idea. Somebody's suggesting DBD characters to Fortnite. Dead by Daylight. None of these replies seem to be in any way connected to Dead by Daylight. Show offensive content. Nah, I don't think we'll do that. Yeah. So not a single one of these replies seems to have anything to do with Dead by Daylight. Yeah. So I'm gonna have to do some research to try and figure out if this is anything or if this is just made up characters, which Dead by Daylight has managed to succeed by adding more and more characters, and so it wouldn't be a terrible mistake for them to just constantly add characters and make up characters when they don't have any other licensed characters that they can add. GameDeveloper.com has an article here that says, alright, so we just disconnected and reconnected from YouTube. I probably won't have any disruption really, like for half a second. We're still not really dropping frames though. And I've seen disconnects and reconnects happen before on YouTube and not mentioned it. Anyways, back to the news. The Quarry developer Supermassive confirms it's planning layoffs. We're committed to focusing our efforts on the core strengths and upcoming titles. It's kind of funny where Supermassive game gets labeled as different developers depending on who's talking or what they're trying to say. Like that, this is the Until Dawn, the Quarry, and the Dark Pictures anthology developer. They made them all. Now, what I'd like to say here is that when they made the Quarry in particular, they hired kind of celebrity faces and actors to do face scans on, and maybe they wasted some money there, but I don't have a way of making any kind of direct connection on that thought, so I can't really make that claim. We're just seeing everybody lay off everybody for anything. I can say in general there has been some financial waste that has been done in the world of making games, AAA games in particular, where they have brought in celebrities or they have brought in just too much content overall, and spent, usually it's not too much content to play, but it's too much polish on content. We really are just gonna have to hit the brakes on making games better looking or longer or more expensive in any way. But yeah, I guess we are in a weird position right now where layoffs are being announced or said they're going to happen, but because we are probably too close to the end of the first quarter. They're just going to wait until the second quarter to start actually announcing layoffs. It does come in stops and starts, really, where you're going to try and lay off people in the first month of the first quarter, or somewhere around the first half of the second month, so January and February. But then if you're still employed by the time you get to February 26th or March, you're probably safe until April. Then there'll just be the first month of the second quarter, which would be April 1st, and half of the next month. And there'll probably be fewer layoffs in the second quarter, and even fewer in the third quarter. And then by the time you're at the fourth quarter, nobody really announces layoffs at so much, as far as they're back to hiring to potentially get temporary workers before the end of the year to lay them off again in the next year. Video Games Chronicle has an article here. Square Enix has revealed that Foam Stars Season 2 is ready to kick off on March 9th. So the seasons definitely don't seem like they're going to be particularly long. Foam Stars, I believe, is still only on PlayStation. Otherwise, I would say there's not been really a lot of talk around Foam Stars. Probably because it is just a exclusive, and there's just really not anything that special around it. It certainly isn't a story that Foam Stars is better than Splatoon, or in some way does something so different from Splatoon that people who are still playing Splatoon are willing to jump over to Foam Stars. Video Games Chronicle has the same story. Until Dawn Studio Supermassive is reportedly laying off 90 employees, so we have an actual number here. We need to go from numbers certainly to names, though. We need to find a way to convince people who have been laid off to stand up and have their name spoken in some way. Idolmaster must still be popular because a new Idolmaster game for iOS and Android is going to be announced on March 5th. Here you have an anime girl that, I guess this is the teaser image. Idolmaster in general is the, I believe, dancing music rhythm game usually, and this doesn't look anything like this, but this may just be the beginning of it. I've also decided to just turn off the blur on watching trailers and videos. We'll see how that goes. Because it really does feel like it is just a case where even blurred, the videos that get claimed are getting claimed, and everything else is just getting blurred for no reason. So there probably was some audio around that, but yeah, that is definitely just a tease. But it does visually show that there is some plans here to have pretty interesting backgrounds while still sticking with the cartoony Idolmaster visual style. They're saying it's going to be likely titled the Idolmaster Gokuin. It is also certainly just going to be a mobile game, which I guess that's probably where they've had their success, is to make Idolmaster mobile games. It's probably not a series that really needs to be on consoles or PC, and maybe doesn't really benefit that much I think the gameplay rhythm concept is simplistic enough for mobile. Reggie Fils-Aimé, the former president of Nintendo of America, which is to say former COO also, but that is also to say not much, because that's not much of a president, because Nintendo of America really is just a puppet company of Nintendo Japan. He also wrote a book, author of the game. He has otherwise been fairly silent. As far as really being out of the video game industry, which is fine. Even though he was seemingly liked by mainstream video game journalists, he doesn't. He really hasn't been missed that much, I suppose. And his replacement, Doug Bowser, in the same way, has been very quiet. And it's very much a case that whoever's in charge of Nintendo of America is just the English-speaking secretary to Nintendo of Japan, and they show up on stage every now and then to announce a game, but they're only allowed on stage when one of the Japanese people, like Shigeru Miyamoto, is also on stage. But yeah, the Game Awards pointed out that 5 years ago this week, he announced he would retire, and his final day was April 15th, 2019. And so he's responded, time flies. But yeah, has time really flown for him? I guess it has, but it certainly hasn't via Twitter, because I'm following him and I'll never see him post anything at all. Yeah. Which is fine. I mean, if you're going to retire and you're just going to stay off Twitter, those are all fine concepts to embrace. But he does still very much have this, like, honorary position, I suppose, and people still want to talk about him and mention him when, honestly, I don't know what you can actually attribute to him for his entire career. And I am being fairly critical here, but yeah, I just don't really know what he actually got approved or what he actually did as the president of Nintendo of America. And I think that probably highlights that if you want to be a video game creator, you probably don't want to work at Nintendo of America unless you want to do the bare minimum of work and really just be a localizer that translates the Japanese games into English. For the most part, even people who work at Nintendo of Japan aren't, I don't think they're actually developing games that often either. The HAL laboratories maybe, but a lot of Nintendo games are actually secretly being developed mostly by second-party developers that they just don't credit, or they don't highlight, at least, that they were created by something. Metroid Dread, they did fully admit that was not really developed by Nintendo. Moving on, the Geolith emulator has been ported to LibRetro. So this is a Neo Geo emulator, a new Neo Geo emulator for LibRetro, which I don't know if there was another Neo Geo emulator that already existed, but when it comes to emulators, you can't have too many, so having different options to potentially launch different ROMs on different emulators, because one emulator might be more accurate or better at running certain games, is really not a problem. And that's one of the things that Emulation Station can kind of help you with, is that you can have per game launch settings, so you can change which emulator might be run for some games versus others. For the most part, you probably don't need to change it too much unless you're actually playing a game and running into problems, and for the most part you won't. But like the more difficult to emulate in Nintendo 64 games in particular, about half of them last time I dealt with Emulation Station and RetroPie, like half of them ran at all on, I won't even say ran good, they ran at all on one emulator, and then half of them ran on a different emulator. Let's see, we're almost done with the news. YouTube creators tweeting still things. Here's another ridiculous thing they tweeted. What's one thing you do every day to prioritize your mental health as a creator? So I imagine the comments here are not going to be good. Yeah, oh snap, I knew I forgot something from Jerry Rig Everything. Go to Rumble instead of YouTube. Yep. But yeah, not really a helpful thread, I imagine, to ask that question. You should probably be answering this question as a YouTube creator's channel. Is like, here's some things we've hired somebody to help improve your mental health, or here's some things we've done to try and improve your mental health. If you're asking, I mean, this is YouTube in a nutshell. YouTube creators here is asking the creators to write a script for them as far as how do you improve your mental health as a creator, so then they can promote those ideas as their own. That they're effectively trying to steal the ideas of the commenters, or at least steal the karma from it. And wouldn't that be YouTube in a nutshell? Is that they're effectively trying to steal the effort, or at least exploit the effort, of content creators to take significant cuts in ad revenue and not pay the vast majority of people who make content on YouTube at all anything for the content they create. And maybe it's not illegal, but it's downright immoral. Certainly they have millions of people trying to become successful enough to get just pennies on ad revenue. Meanwhile, the vast majority of people will never get into the YouTube content, YouTube partner program, and will never see a dime for their effort. Meanwhile, if you were to try to do the same thing, if you were Walmart and said work for a day, work for even an hour, and if you're really good at it, we'll pay you, that would be illegal by any other metric. Let's see. I was linked to this article from this website. I don't know what it is. I've never heard of The Gamer, but whatever. Apparently Devolver Digital is bringing back manuals, and they're all into it. I miss the physicality of owning games. Having manuals in video games, it should not come back. It's just ridiculous. Waste of paper, waste of resources, makes it more expensive. Should there be instructions in video games? Yes, but why in the world would they be paper, non-interactive instructions? For every game that took away a manual, they should have made a tutorial in their game. And unfortunately, far too many games didn't do that, and now there are a lot of games that you're just expected to understand how to play games. whereas you could not have that same expectation in previous generations of games. And I definitely have heard stories where if you put a controller in the hands of somebody who has never played a game, never held a controller before, there is a lot of just subconscious language as far as how you control a controller, how you hold a controller, what button does what, that is just not explained. In modern games, certainly just assume you've already seen tutorials that A means jump and B means crouch and right trigger means fire a gun, where you have to either figure out how to navigate a menu and know that A means confirm and B means cancel or back, to even get to the key mapping settings to figure out if what buttons will do what. But physical printouts is not the answer at all. I could see perhaps print on demand services for manuals. If you absolutely wanted a manual, you could order one and have it mailed to you. That would be very wasteful, certainly, but it would be way less wasteful than having included manuals. But there is, I imagine, something to be said about the artistry of the extra art being created for manuals and somebody writing the manuals. Jobs were almost certainly lost in the case of manuals going away. But yeah, you just can't move backwards in time. Now, I don't think I'm gonna ever come to the gamer again, or at least not often enough. The other point here to mention certainly is limited buying, like a collector's edition and then one of the items being a manual does not really add much value to a collector's edition. And that's why we've seen in almost all collector's edition that there hasn't been manuals added. I would much prefer an art book if you're going to highlight the art, and I wouldn't be opposed to, in the art book, there being a general story and some like synopsis of what the game is for writing, if you want to keep a writer employed. But yeah, I don't think anybody really cares about knowing what specific buttons do what in a physical print form. That should just be in the tutorial of the game, or in the at least menu and key mapping settings. Of course, again, if somebody was brand new to games, if an alien landed on Earth and tried to play video games, they really would have no clue how to hold a controller or what button does what. What was TubeBuddy talking about here? TubeBuddy, in contrast to YouTube creators, was asking, besides YouTube, what's your favorite social platform to share videos on? Let's see, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, X, TikTok, Facebook or TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Pornhub. Yeah. But yeah, TikTok seems to be the big one there, and then as far as people that use TubeBuddy. Although in fairness, I also should point out that while I still follow TubeBuddy on YouTube, on Twitter, I kind of don't use them anymore. None of their features in the free set are actually helpful to me, and none of their paid features that they promote are interesting enough to make me actually pay for the paid version of TubeBuddy. My own manual programming of macros are by far way more helpful than anything TubeBuddy has, and as far as just automating the experience of scheduling and releasing videos, a lot of that has to do with the fact that YouTube Studio has just improved quite a bit compared to several years ago when TubeBuddy was just the must-need plugin, or at least one of the plugins you could use to make it feasible to actually schedule videos, lots of videos on YouTube, and get all the information labeled correctly. Oh, speaking of labeling information correctly, I didn't do anything to the programming as far as the YouTube clips today, and so it's probably going to break again. It didn't work last time either. I'm still trying, although I didn't try today. Here you have YouTube Gaming trying to be relevant. What's your current rank in the finals? And then here you have a pathetic attempt at engagement. What are the last 4? That's asking quite a lot. Games that you completed. For some gamers, 4 games might be over a year's worth of games that you've completed. And again, you can see only 61 comments and only 9 retweets, even though this has been shown and seen by 44,000 people. And then here you have yet another YouTuber that I've never even heard of. Z-Cider has been on YouTube for 17 years, which she looks good for somebody who's been on YouTube for 17 years. But yeah, she's had 3 billion views, almost 4 billion views, and yet I've never even heard of her. I've never seen her, I've never heard of her. Which either means I am really, really bad and disconnected from gamers on YouTube, which is probably true. But it also highlights, I think in part, how YouTube Gaming has done a really terrible job of promoting, and YouTube in general has done a really terrible job of promoting gamers at all. Alright. So I need to find the games that came out last time, and I didn't have that open, so this will just take a second. There we go. So here are the games that I've opted to make YouTube shorts on from Friday's stream. Don't know why Kingdom Come Deliverance got in that mix, but Contra, I'm not gonna name all of these. Some of these feel like they might be repetitions, but whatever. And so these are all games that are coming out. Of the 2 games, Sea of Thieves 2023 edition is the right game to play. It's pretty obvious that that's the case. But as an online only game, it is also a game I have no intention of ever playing, so I'm gonna go ahead and take it off the following list, because I'm personally never gonna play it. And then let's see when we're gonna get to a game that needs a secondary pass, as far as whether or not it's something. Yeah, if I was going to try to make a rogue Sudoku, it did occur to me I probably should. I have had like direct communication with Gray Alien Games I could probably just pitch the idea or give the idea to them, and they might be able to make it, although they may not, because Gray Alien Games really has only made games using the solitaire game engine that they're using to make solitaire games. Let's see. I'll give this game a chance. I think I already had that on the follow list. Let's see what. Can reload that. And this doesn't look good enough. Visiting a shrine at night probably is nothing, but I'll give it a chance. This doesn't have enough visual polish. You could potentially make a game with this kind of art style, but I think what you would want to do if you're going to have the characters are basically one solid character color is you would need to have the colors stand out from the background quite a bit, so you couldn't have purple on purple, and you probably would want almost a completely different art style, and so it might come off a little asset flippy where you would have just 3D realistic graphics of the background and then solid color images in the foreground. It's kind of reminiscent of the way they depict killers in Detective Conan, which is called Case Closed in the West as far as an anime goes. But yeah, they often show the murder in these murder mystery episodes in Detective Conan, and the murderer is often a male shadowy figure, even if sometimes it's a female that ends up being the killer, to throw you off and not let you just know who the killer is. And then the fun part about Detective Conan stories are that you then spend the rest of the episode trying to figure out who the killer is, trying to solve the mystery. And I would say that Detective Conan probably does a little bit better job than a lot of other murder mystery type TV shows, where they don't give you enough evidence to actually solve the murder, and they're withholding secret information that you absolutely would have. And that's never really fun for me, is if you're just watching a murder mystery show and then you have Sherlock Holmes announcing that he's solved who the killer is because he saw something that that nobody else saw and the viewer wouldn't been aware of, which that was kind of a problem with some, if not all, of the Sherlock Holmes novels, is that Sherlock Holmes would just say he observed something more than what Watson, who was supposed to be the author of the Sherlock Holmes story, was observing. I'll give this a chance, I guess. Ideally, a murder mystery in book or TV form should show you the same things that the detective can see. Particularly in TV, that creates a weird situation where TV videographers, directors are going to try really hard to make sure the objects of importance are well lit and shown well. This is a weird art style, just sunken in eyes. So yeah, in TV, if somebody says an extra line of dialogue, if somebody shows a certain object on the shelf, it almost certainly plays an important role, or you're trying to fill the shots in the dialogue with red herrings, which I don't think that works particularly well either. We have a game called Turlock Holmes. Give that a chance. VR might be, well, video games in general might be the perfect format for more murder mystery type experiences, because of the fact that you're Taoist survivors. Well, you know, this does look a little bit different, but I still don't think it's good enough to promote. And really doesn't look like a survivors game that much. Yeah, in a video game format, in VR, where you are, as the player, controlling what the camera looks at, you could have a room full of clues and then just have the player completely walk by those clues and not see them if he's not being observant, whereas more observant players would then see those clues and be able to use them to form a deduction. And frankly, you can make a pretty decent walking simulator around that concept, where you're just walking around probably asset flipped environments with objects, and then you're asked who was the killer at the end as the one big reveal. Here we have what looks like yet another Japanese only visual novel, which it's interesting to see that continue to happen. The only real concern would be that, are we potentially running into cases where fewer and fewer Japanese visual novels are bothering to be translated to English? And I don't think that's really the case, because even if you're not really targeting a Western audience, it's very easy to translate a Japanese visual novel to English if you were going to spend that extra money, just so you can sell it in Korea and China, where Koreans, Chinese people won't speak Japanese or read Japanese, but they would probably have a decent chance of reading English. Garden Life, Cozy Life Simulator. Thought we'd already made a YouTube short around that. Welcome to Ukraine. Looks like it's just a collection of jigsaw puzzles. So I'd have to say no to making a YouTube short on that, just because it's a jigsaw puzzle game. And frankly, if I did put something with Ukraine in the name, I wouldn't be surprised if there are people on both sides of the Ukraine-Russian war that would decide to jump in and comment something political on just making a YouTube short around the game. So I want to try to avoid any political comments that YouTube would then punish me for not deleting fast enough. Yeah, this doesn't look polished enough. There's still been no progress. It's been years, probably, but no progress as far as trying to figure out whether a horror game is actually a horror game or whether it is just a low effort asset flip game. I guess that is probably just the plateau. That is as high as you can go as far as oversaturation of video games on Steam, is that the only next step. If this wasn't an asset flip game, I might have given it a chance. The idea of playing as a giant lady isn't the craziest of thoughts, although it seems like you're really just defending her. It says save it, giant girl from monsters. I'm not really seeing any monsters. Just little red balls. A roguelike chest. Now that is an interesting idea. Certainly. Here we have just the exact same low effort game with another asset flipped 3D model. Yeah. I don't think I want to just promote something with pirates just because pirates. But you know what? I'll promote it more because it looks like it might be a decent game. We've hit a certain level with SCP, although in fairness, this doesn't look like a low effort SCP game. This actually looks like this might be something. And this is what I've been looking for as far as secure, control, protect, or whatever SCP stands for. And that website was all about since the game Control came out. Yeah, if anything, this might be closer to what SCP should be than even Control is. And I guess it's taken me up until this very second to realize that Control is the word control from SCP. So they probably were going to have just SCP in the title of Control originally, and they shortened it down to Control, which does imply you could have a game called Secure, which is not what you really do in Control. And you could have a game called Protect. So if you were going to do that, then the question is, do you make a prequel to Control called Secure? Or do you make a sequel to Control called Secure? Or do you just call it Control 2, which would be the smart move to go by? Or do you make a sequel called Protect and you just yeah, I don't know how you would really go about that, because I guess if you're going to go that way, you probably should just call it Control 2. That would make the most sense. And give up on the ideas of Secure. Maybe you have a mission in the game called Secure. And then maybe you have a mission called Protect. And certainly the name isn't my big problems around Control. My big problem around Control was the repetitive gameplay and repetitive enemies. It was a game that felt like it wanted to be very ambitious, and yet in the end was actually very repetitive in the fighting. Sokobond Express. Chemical bonds, interesting. Now there is a ton of games here that are already on the fallen list, and I am just assuming I'm going to make another YouTube short based on that. Which, yeah, I think that's gonna prove itself to be a mistake in the long run. It's just gonna make way more YouTube shorts. a lot of games here are just a lot of games here are coming out now. They had been announced before. Are we due for another decent zombie game? I don't know if we're ever really due for another decent zombie game. We are so oversaturated with zombie games. Anyways. But we are kind of lacking lately a horror game. The Callisto Protocol didn't sell well, and the Dead Space remake did sell well, but didn't really go anywhere. They didn't try to add any DLC or continue it, and they haven't made any promises that they'd remake Dead Space 2. Here we have yet another Japanese only visual novel. Fell in love with a fantasy farmer. This is just an RPG Maker game, although in fairness I would say the characters here aren't just your standard these are MILFs with giant boobs characters that imply that there's some uncensored patch. There very possibly may still be an uncensored patch for this game, but wouldn't just immediately assume that. Yeah, seems like there probably is, since there is one excluded based on my preferences. Regardless of whether there's adult content in these RPG Maker style games, they're still RPG Maker style games, so they're going to be no. We still have far too many of those on Steam already. And you would have to have just extremely an extremely long break or an extremely long amount of time of very few RPG Maker games on Steam before the visual style of RPG games would even begin to appeal to me. Here we have another visual novel, although weirdly this one is hiding its Chinese and Japanese language supports under the fold, and it is kind of weird that they can pick, the publishers of the game can pick which languages go in what order, when it would probably make more sense to put everything in an alphabetical order. This one doesn't look particularly interesting though. I would say the art style feels a little off. Honestly, I probably should not put any visual novels on the following list, although that's incredibly unfair. There are a few visual novels that are worth covering. This is terrible. Polygon images. Let's see. Now that is a little surprising that as far as all the ridiculous low effort video games that get published via Steam Direct, it's surprising that there aren't more that are just rock, paper, scissors styles of games. I'm going to put this on the follow list, but as far as making a short around it, I don't think it's good enough. Screenshots aren't good enough. You don't need an aim trainer. Sling puzzles. I'll give it a chance. Yeah, you would think that you could just make rock, paper, scissors games. Here we have another game that should, by the looks of the tags, be in the adult section, and yet it isn't. It says it's Japanese full audio. Looks like it's a kind of ugly 3D CGI game. They say it's a simple card flip game. And yet, here's a screenshot of her kicking people and her being hit. Although in all fairness, I guess assault just goes both ways, isn't it? She's assaulting him, he's assaulting her. She ends up the loser of that fight. But the real game is just this, with these terrible screenshots. And the quality here looks so poor, and the mislabeling here is so obvious. Obviously somebody at Valve, somebody at Steam should have caught this and said, no, we're not gonna let that. Meanwhile, that was a game that was being rated positively, which that just confuses me and makes me assume that we are just increasingly having people make fake accounts to review games, even buying or gifting the game to those fake accounts. Here we have another one of these low effort Chinese porn without nudity games, because real porn is not allowed in China, or it doesn't seem like it's really allowed. This almost seems like there would be a real game here, but it's pretty obvious that there isn't a real game. And again, that's such a low quality game that it does beg into question as far as should there just be a little bit of, just the tiniest bit of curation as far as what is allowed on Steam. And certainly I do think that there is just possibly some other systems other than direct censorship curation. There could be just certain quotas as far as, if you put a game on Steam via Steam Direct, it must get this many sales in the first week, this many sales in the second week, otherwise it's going to be removed. That's not super fair, but yeah, and 1 week is probably not the right metric, and it wouldn't really affect me at all, because I would still see every single game that comes out, or nearly every single game that comes out. I almost want to say yes to this just because it looks like it's a blind character, but the animation on this doesn't look good enough. English and Russian languages. Yeah, the only way I could think a certain quota of sales would really work would be at either a month or a quarter or a year after it's released, and that might help quite a bit. But it still would be kind of unfair to the consumer, because if somebody wants to buy a game that was released 10 years ago and it's not really selling more than 10 units nowadays, that doesn't mean the game wasn't good 10 years ago. And it doesn't mean that the consumer, the gamer, should be stopped from buying the game. So yeah, there are definitely trade-offs. It probably would be best if they just raised the price of Steam Direct. I don't think anybody would complain if they said Steam Direct now costs $200 to submit a game instead of $100. Just do that experiment and see how much that really affects things. Probably won't affect things too much, but heck, if you could reduce even by 5% the garbage games that get put on Steam. This is funny, there is a pinball table called Pinbot that looks nothing like this, and this doesn't even look like a pinball game. It looks like at best it's some kind of 3D Arkanoid game, but even at that it doesn't look good. Excuse me. Yep. Increasingly, we just have way too many games. This is a limitation you definitely could have. Sorry, I set an alarm clock. I'm gonna have to remind myself to silence that later. If you just stopped Steam Direct people from releasing the same game in the same day, or multiple games in the same day, different games obviously, not the same game, that would help. If you just stopped them and said you can, as somebody who's going through the Steam Direct program and doesn't have a separate special contract with Valve, as a publisher you can only release one game per week, so 4 games per month. That is a very reasonable limitation for everybody other than, say, maybe Konami, who needs to shovel out 3 or 4 old games per week. And even Konami probably could live under the restriction of 1 game per week. No publisher out there, not even Xbox Studios, would actually be publishing a different game on Steam per week. And certainly I guess you could probably apply for a special dispensation, as it were, if you were Microsoft and you needed to release an entire back catalog on Steam at the same time. But it just doesn't make sense that any publisher, anybody even going by different publisher names but having the same address and billing address, should be allowed to put more than 1 game per week out. And yeah, does that potentially control the release schedules of publishers? Yes. Would that maybe get Valve in trouble with the Federal Trade Commission? Maybe. But I would like to see them try either way. Almost certainly there are similar limitations on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. I don't get the feeling that it works that way on those storefronts. So it could work at Valve that way if Valve cared. Valve theoretically has some employee looking through all these games before they're released. Theoretically, I say, because I don't know if I really believe that there is somebody looking at all these games, and it may very well just be some guy in India or some guy in some cheap country that barely speaks English just flipping through them and approving anything that runs. I question whether there even is a system here where the screenshots actually have to be from the actual game. I don't think they do. Almost certainly I've seen teaser trailers and videos that have content that is not actually in the game. But I also, I guess it's worth pointing out that I haven't seen too many games that have tried to cheat or lie about what is in the game with screenshots. So apparently that is something you can flag. Although I don't know how you would flag a screenshot per se. You just have to flag the game itself. Here we have yet another game that should be in the adult section. You have a bunny girl outfit that happens to be in gold, skin tight outfit, to the point where, I mean, this is probably one of the best examples of how in animation in particular you can make the clothing so glued on to the character that they might as well not be wearing clothing when you're seeing what looks like ribs and belly buttons on the character. Which, yeah, you would be very hard pressed to make an outfit in the real world that could be that tight fitting and that revealing. It could be done, certainly, but it's not likely to happen. Let's see. I almost want to say yes to this, but then you have this problem of the visual novels having just no character in the screen for a couple screenshots, and then kind of slight inconsistency in the animation between here and here, and slight inconsistency in this animation between here and here and here. Oh, speaking of animation, I watched the pilot for Has Been Hotel on YouTube, and yeah, I kind of like the first song better than what is in episode 1 of the Amazon Prime video, although I'm gonna really need to rewatch all of that now that the audio issue of the dialogue boost was corrected. I had dialogue boost enabled and it made the audio sound terrible when they started singing. But there is definitely a problem with later songs in the pilot that had them just singing too fast, too many words, too fast, without really any subtitles that had been hand written, so it would just be the auto-generated subtitles, which wouldn't be that helpful. Yeah, you kind of have to sing slower than you might talk if you're trying to get every single word heard and understood. I'm gonna leave this on the follow list, but I'm not gonna make another YouTube short around it. And it does have this weird effect where the pilot on the YouTube channel feels like it's taking place like a year before the first episode of the TV series. So they're the Amazon Prime streaming service, so you both kind of don't need to watch the pilot, but you probably should watch the pilot first, even though it's going to feel different with different voice actors, and just feel a little bit different otherwise. What I think probably would be best for Has Been Hotel on Amazon Prime is if the season 2 just brought in more skilled, more experienced music writers and animators, and it definitely feels like the kind of series that could have a full-on reboot very quickly, with just a little bit more polish to it and a little bit more experienced songwriters, singers. I mean, it already definitely feels like it's benefiting a little bit from Amazon Prime's money and investment in it, but it's not benefiting quite enough. And I would hate to see the whole project just taken away from the original creators, but it kind of needs to be that way, I think, to be the best it could be. Of course, that is making some major assumptions that may very well not be the actual case. Get the banners working again. So we're back to the news now. Let's see where we are with the SteamDB concurrent user levels. Counter-Strike 2 going very strong again. And it doesn't feel like Counter-Strike 2 has to put out any kind of update or anything to go very strong. But Battlefield might be a good one to look for. It's probably way down there. Palworld has fallen down to below 300,000 concurrent and is in the 6th spot. Helldivers 2 is holding the 4th spot. I believe it was in the 4th spot before, at a new all-time high, and it definitely would be at an all-time high, or almost an all-time high, if it could just double its players, which is what I think they said they were trying to do, is to raise it from 400,000 players concurrent to 800,000. So very easily, if that is the case, that they can get the servers doubled, then it will jump to the 2nd spot. But it seems like it's artificially being limited by its own player cap. Let's see. So you have Call of Duty in the 12th position, but one of the complaints about Call of Duty is that they really have merged everything together. So if you're playing like Modern Warfare or anything like that, you have to all launch the same Call of Duty. So that might be 2 or 3 games merged together. And then the question is, will we even see Battlefield? Battlefield, in contrast, Battlefield 5 is in the 34th spot, and this was released on November 9th, 2018. So this is the older Battlefield, I think, than Battlefield 2048. And I will only scroll down to the top 100 to see if we see Battlefield 2048 even in the top 100. I'm not gonna seek it out otherwise. Yeah, as far as I can tell, there's no Battlefield 2048 being played at all in the top 100, which would mean that less than 18,000 players, less than 19,000 players at least, are not playing it. Sea of Thieves here is doing kind of poorly, but it is an old game, in the 82nd spot. Do we have Skull and Bones in the top 100? That would be another interesting question. As a new launch, Skull and Bones probably should be in the top 100. But I'm not seeing it. Maybe it's not on Steam, or maybe it's not out yet. Unless I just overlooked it. It is an interesting question, I suppose, is how long can a game be in development before there's some hesitation and negativity built around that game? There definitely is a line there, and there definitely is a case where if your game got leaked out years early, or if you announced your games years earlier than you should have, people are probably not going to be super hyped around it when it does launch. But I do think that's probably like 1 or 2 years too early. I don't think if a game leaks a month early, that loses you that many sales, or any sales at all. Looking at my chart here, Helldivers definitely just still bouncing around. Apex Legends having a slow decline. Palworld dropping precipitously. Last Epoch still going high. I still don't know what this game is. Yeah, Baldur's Gate going high. Alright, and so now they're doing a 2K publisher sale on Steam, which I imagine it is worth it. There's Palworld. Let's see if we can see also Helldivers. Yeah, I do think it probably is worth highlighting what is available on Steam every stream. That is picking a certain platform and promoting a certain platform over others, like the Epic Game Store and Good Old Games. But me highlighting Steam is really as much me just reflecting the fact that the gaming community has chosen Steam as their default platform. And right, so here's that game, Lost Epoch. Let's go ahead and open that in the new tab and see what that's all about. And then Helldivers, not highlighted until we get to this point, which at a certain level I guess Helldivers probably should only be highlighted in this area, because them getting more sales is only hurting them in the long run, because they don't have enough servers. Okay, before we pretend like we're gonna make video game clips, let's check this game to make sure it's on the wish list, which it is, and it is overwhelmingly positive, so I can just go ahead and move it from the follow list to the wish list, which is what I meant to say. And then this game, Lost Epoch, apparently is mostly positive at 70%, and then they're claiming it's been review bombed, and most recently it's at 60%. So why is the player base here going up when the reviews and positivity around it is kind of low? You can definitely see that a lot of this feels like it's a Diablo clone. I question, what is the story behind this? And they're claiming, how do you even get this? See what these review bomb reviews are all about. Is this a Russian game, or a game that's been bought by Tencent? Yeah, so Tencent bought the game at this point, at some point in 2022, but I think the real reviews by far It must have just come out of early access, and I wouldn't be surprised if they just shoved it out of early access. Same bugs I encountered in early access are still there. Unplayable at peak times, dungeons don't work in co-op. Game's broken, I wouldn't recommend it. So Tencent invested in it, then a couple of years later Tencent, or 11th Hour Games, decided to shove the game out of early access. And from its current position, there's no reason to keep that on the follow list. Alright. So, very quickly, well, we don't look like we have that much news as far as headlines to even talk about, so we should be able to burn through this very quickly. Unfortunately, I already know that I'm unlikely to get clips from this, but one day I'll get the programming right and we will get clips going, and it probably won't ever affect anything that I do it that way. Although inherently this does give me an excuse to wrap up going through the news at the end of these streams anyways by just reading the headlines and not trying to delve much deeper than that. So it may solve a problem that I've had in the long run of just becoming long-winded around news stories. Although I'm not sure that really is a problem. That may be a good thing to actually have an opinion and say something around the news stories instead of just reading the headlines. So I guess I'm only saying there that I probably need some feedback. Let's go through the headlines though. There's no better time to jump into Dungeon Fighter Online. This is sponsored content. Square Enix reveals Foam Stars Season 2. Until Dawn Studio Supermassive is reportedly laying off 90 employees. Tekken 8 hits 2 million sales in the first month. Baldur's Gate 3 execs condemns threats and toxicity against devs as they work on mod support. Final Fantasy music legend Nobu Uematsu doesn't think you'll ever compose a whole game again. Switch 2 is targeting March 2025 and was delayed to avoid shortages, a new report claims. Bravely Default producer teases an announcement later this year. Helldivers 2 bucks UK physical game trend as weekly sales rise for the second time. Rainbow Six Siege director believes the game can last forever. The almost decade-old shooter has remained one of Ubisoft's most popular titles. Yep. I don't think forever is probably the right term to use, but certainly the idea of sieging is somewhat unique compared to like Counter-Strike 2, and as such people that enjoy that could probably play it forever. And I guess that's where if you just lock in a big enough player base to stay around forever, that'll work. Meanwhile, the contrast to Rainbow Six Siege's success would be the many failures like Payday 3, which have really failed to gain an audience, or games like Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, which had fandoms but doesn't have multiplayer elements to them. They only have co-op elements to them. So there isn't really a reason that a ton of people would be playing like Left 4 Dead 1 or 2. And perhaps they made a mistake by making a Left 4 Dead 2 instead of just adding more content to Left 4 Dead 1. Miyazaki says there's a high possibility he delegates directing for future Souls games. Dark Souls 2 remains the only original Souls game not directed by Miyazaki. Yeah. With Elden Ring in existence right now, and DLC being announced for Elden Ring, I don't know if there really needs to be another game just ending in Souls. Even Bloodborne kind of makes an argument that if you're going to make those styles of games, you probably should change up the visual theming a little bit. Lies of P is another example of that, where the same thing over and over again as you got with Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and I believe there is a Dark Souls 3. Yeah, probably just too much repetition, where inherently also in the world of Demon Souls and Dark Souls, I kind of can't tell you what the story is or what the plot is. Maybe I could name a few characters, but I don't think from the outside looking in, as somebody who didn't really finish any of the Souls games, I don't think there's a full plot there and a fully developed world that people actually care about. It might be the kind of game that would benefit from having a spin-off game or a anime based on it or something like that to just tell me what is actually going on. Maybe just more cutscenes in the game itself to really explain what's going on and what the world is like. Moving on, Halo co-creator Marcus Leto has left the EA Battlefield studio he founded. Rise of the Ronin latest trailer explores combat styles. Activision is working to fix Modern Warfare 3 and Warzone progression tracking issues. That's an old story. And see, that wasn't too much really. Now we'll just go through a few Gamatsu articles and then we'll go through GameDeveloper.com articles and then we'll be done. A lot of this probably has to do with the fact that it was the weekend, and so there's just nothing. There's just nothing new to be announced on the weekend ever. Ender Magnolia Bloom in the Mist adds PS4 and 5, Xbox Series and PC version. It launches in early access for PC on March 25th. So this is some new game. There is this weirdness, it feels like, where we're potentially going to I personally may potentially fall into this habit of not feeling like a game is really announced or really worth paying attention to unless there's some kind of Nintendo Direct, Microsoft Direct, PlayStation Direct around it. This is kind of the example. Here's an action RPG game I've seen nothing else about, and I would either need several more press releases to keep me interested in this game, or I'm just gonna immediately forget it. Whereas if this was announced at a Nintendo Direct, then I would feel like, oh, this must be an important game that they're putting some marketing behind, and I would give it more attention on that first Direct announcement, which that certainly isn't fair, but that is, I imagine, the whole idea of advertising things and having Directs is to highlight or make the consumer think that the products that are being highlighted stand out and are better than just a random game released on Steam without a Nintendo Direct or any bigger form of advertising. Supermassive Games is going to lay off roughly 90 staff. Between Horizons for PC launches March 25th. This is some kind of sci-fi point-and-click adventure game. Or at least it looks like a point-and-click adventure game. It may not actually be that. And see, This may be a case where the art style is going to make me think it's one thing, and then the actual gameplay might be something fairly different. Die Gut Fabric halts production due to extreme difficulties in publishing and the investment scene. The studio will continue to operate previously released titles. I've never heard of this. This sounds like a German company. Die would be the Gute, who knows, and then Fabric, who knows. I would wonder if this is supposed to be the Fabric Factory in German. They were the developer of Salt Sea Chronicles, a game I don't recognize, and Muda Zion. If there's one thing to take from this, I would guess, though, it probably highlights the differences in culture as far as running a business, and the differences as far as how employee protections work in Germany versus the United States. Whereas every other Western United States based, or companies that feel like they're based in the United States, company has just announced that they're going to lay off people. Here you have a company saying, well, we're just going to shut down. And partially, maybe that is because it is impossible or unhelpful to lay off people in Germany, assuming this is a German company. But in part, I imagine it might just be a cultural thing too, to say it's probably better to not pick and choose winners and just make everybody lose by shutting down the company, including the managers and the CEOs and all of them. Because inherently that is what layoffs mean. It's the management saying, well, everybody should suffer, but I don't want to suffer, so I'm going to pick some other people to suffer for me and lay those people off. Moving on. Tekken 8 sales top 2 million. Renatus is coming to the West this fall for the PS4 and 5, Switch, and PC. Some kind of Atari developed action RPG. This is another great example of a game that feels like I should have seen a trailer for somewhere. Yeah. New The Idolmaster game for iOS and Android to be announced on March 5th. Il Velo Swamp Happy Together announced for Switch. That's a long title. It means nothing to me. Pixel art open world action RPG Sea Fantasy has been announced for console and PC. I wonder how much games like Raft and the popularity around Raft may have influenced games like Sea of Thieves and Skull and Bones, even though the two types of games are fairly different. Renata's first trailer details and screenshots is due out July 25th in Japan. So I guess I was right in that I hadn't seen this before. Oh yeah, I think I actually have seen a slight trailer of this where there was a lady fighting people and just floating in the air and moving around. Yeah. And then doing a lot of lock-on targeting, it looked like. I'm not sure if what I saw was this or not. Oh. Let's jump around here. In a funny way, if you told me this was secretly like work that would have been in that new what is the name of that series with Disney and Square Enix? I forgot the name of what those were called. Kingdom Hearts. If you told me secretly that some of that footage was originally developed from Kingdom Hearts, I'd believe you. Yep, and I'm still not sure. Yeah. I'm still not sure if that's footage I saw before. But it probably was. Still have no clue what this game really is about. But that does really highlight the new Kingdom Hearts that they've teased, the idea of being in a hyper-realistic Tokyo and then having swords and doing hack and slash fighting. Yep. Of course, you can make an unlimited number of games like that where you have magic and sword fighting happening in a realistic world. It's mostly just a gimmick. This week's Japanese game releases: Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Barstella Abyss, and more. I'll scroll down here and look at the list. It's a pretty long list. Meanwhile, they definitely have done something to cut down the digital only list. It used to be 2 or 3 times this long. Unless, of course, it was a case that physical sales were just becoming digital only sales because of the pandemic, and even that, though, really wouldn't account for the fact that the digital only lists felt like it was 2 or 3 times as long. That would only add 2 or 3 games, not double or triple it. Moving on. Bravely series producer Tomoya Asano teases new developments to be announced in 2024. High on Life for the PS5 and Xbox Series limited print physical editions have been announced. And that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com articles, and we literally only have like 4 of those. Well, 3 of those. The Query developer Supermassive confirms it's planning layoffs. Salt Sea Chronicles developer Die Gut Fabrik disbands. Why have I never heard of this game, Salt Sea Chronicles? Well, I guess it's pretty much the case that I probably have missed a lot of games. Does this in any way motivate me to go and buy or play Salt Sea Chronicles or Muda Zion? Not really. And then they have a list here of a rapidly growing number of layoffs and closures. So, yeah, Steam literally has just a tag of layoffs. I mean, not Steam, but GameDeveloper.com has a tag of layoffs, and you can just scroll down let's see, at least 2 pages of everything they've reported on, I think just in 2024. Well, this is going to September of 2023. Yeah. They could probably go back and relabel a bunch of their older articles with the tag layoffs too, and that would probably highlight a lot more layoffs over the years. Media Molecule unveils an accessibility-focused studio program for future games. And with that is going to be the last of this stream. So, yeah, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.